December 18, 1944. Zurich, Switzerland. The Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule, the Federal Institute of Technology, one of the great scientific universities of the world. Einstein taught here. Pauli is here now. The building smells of chalk dust and cold stone, and the particular institutional silence of a place that considers itself above the war raging 6 hours away by train. The lecture hall holds perhaps 60 chairs. Maybe 40 are occupied. Graduate students, professors, a few visitors from other departments. The normal population of a Thursday afternoon physics seminar in a neutral country that has spent 5 years pretending the world outside its borders is someone else's problem. In the front row, slightly to the left of center, sits a man who does not look like a physicist. He is 6 feet 1 inch tall. He is 42 years old. He has the build of an athlete going soft at the edges. Broad shoulders, thick hands, the residual physical authority of a man who spent 15 years catching fastballs for a living. He is wearing a civilian suit. He is carrying a program from the lecture series. He has a notebook open on his knee. In his coat pocket, pressed against his left ribs, a .45 caliber pistol. In his other pocket, a cyanide capsule, small, glass, fast. The man's name is Morris Berg. Everyone calls him Mo. The man walking to the lectern is Werner Heisenberg. Nobel Prize in Physics, 1932, age 43. The man who gave the world the uncertainty principle, the idea, radical and precise simultaneously, that you cannot know both the position and the momentum of a particle at the same time. The act of observing changes the thing observed. Heisenberg does not know he is being observed. He does not know that the large, quiet man in the front row has a weapon in order to use it. He arranges his notes. He begins to speak. Berg listens. The next 90 minutes will determine whether a Nobel laureate walks out of this building alive. They will also, in ways that nobody in that room can possibly understand yet, determine something larger. Whether the war ends with one kind of bomb or another. To understand what Mo Berg was doing in that lecture hall, you have to understand what Mo Berg was, which is to say, you have to understand that Mo Berg was several people simultaneously and that none of them fully explained the others. He was born on March 2, 1902 in Manhattan, the youngest child of Ukrainian Jewish immigrants. His father, Bernard, ran a pharmacy in Newark, New Jersey, a practical man, a man who had crossed an ocean and built something from nothing, and had very specific ideas about what a serious life looked like. A lawyer, a doctor, something with a future that could be described in concrete terms at a dinner table. Baseball was not on that list. Mo Berg became a baseball player anyway. He also became something else, several something elses. At Princeton, where he arrived in 1919 and graduated magna cum laude in 1923, he studied modern languages. Not casually, with the systematic ferocity of a man who understood that language was not just communication, it was access. Latin, Greek, French, Spanish, Italian, German, Sanskrit. He studied them all and retained them all with a memory that his classmates described as photographic and his professors described as alarming. He was also the best baseball player in Princeton's history. Shortstop, 3 years starting. The scouts from Brooklyn and the Giants both wanted him at graduation. He signed with Brooklyn. He also enrolled at the Sorbonne in Paris that same fall, studying French phonetics between baseball seasons. This was the pattern of Mo Berg's life. 2 things simultaneously that had no business coexisting: baseball and Sanskrit. The dugout in Columbia Law School, where he earned his degree in 1930 while still catching for the White Sox. His teammate Ted Lyons offered the definitive summary. He can speak 12 languages, but he can't hit in any of them. Berg's batting average over 15 seasons in the major leagues was .243. Casey Stengel, one of the greatest baseball minds of the century, called him the smartest ball player who ever played the game. Both things were true. They were also both slightly beside the point, because what Berg actually was, in retrospect, was a man who had spent his entire life building a specific kind of cover without knowing it was cover. An American, an athlete, a Princeton man who could order dinner in 7 languages. A person who was everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, comfortable in Tokyo, in Rome, in Zurich, in a dugout in Boston, in a Columbia Law classroom, in a State Department briefing room. The OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, forerunner of the CIA, recognized this in August 1943 when they formally recruited him. General William Donovan, the OSS director, understood what his agency needed. Not just soldiers, not just academics, men who could be invisible in multiple worlds at once. Berg was the most invisible man they had. To understand why Berg was sent to Zurich with a pistol and a cyanide capsule, you have to understand the specific terror that drove the decision. The Manhattan Project. By December 1944, the United States had been building the atomic bomb for 3 years. The project was enormous. 130,000 people, 30 sites across the country, $2 billion. The collective scientific intelligence of a generation focused on a single objective. It was the largest scientific undertaking in human history. And General Leslie Groves, the Army officer who commanded it, was terrified. Not of failure, of competition. The question that kept Groves awake, the question that drove the formation of the Alsos mission, the intelligence operation tasked with discovering the state of Germany's nuclear program, was simple and annihilating. What if they're ahead of us? Germany had started its nuclear research program before the United States. Germany had Werner Heisenberg, arguably the greatest theoretical physicist alive, a man who had helped invent quantum mechanics, a man who understood the physics of atomic fission with an intimacy that very few people on Earth could match. What if Heisenberg had solved the problem? What if the first atomic bomb belonged to Hitler? The intelligence on the German program was fragmentary and contradictory. Some reports suggested German research had stalled, that the program was underfunded, disorganized, pulled in too many directions by a Nazi bureaucracy that did not fully understand what it had. Other reports suggested the opposite: secret facilities, heavy water production in Norway, uranium procurement in Belgium and Czechoslovakia. Groves could not afford to guess wrong. The Alsos mission sent scientists and intelligence officers into Europe as Allied forces advanced, following the front, seizing documents, interviewing captured German physicists, trying to piece together a picture of what Germany actually had. The picture, by late 1944, was encouraging but not conclusive. Germany did not appear to have a working bomb, but Germany had Heisenberg. And Heisenberg was still in Germany, still working, still, as far as Allied intelligence could determine, still trying. Then came the intelligence report that changed everything. Heisenberg had been invited to give a seminar at ETH Zurich in December 1944. He was leaving Germany. He was coming to neutral Switzerland. He was going to give a lecture on physics. And in that lecture, if Heisenberg was close to a breakthrough, if Germany was closing on the bomb, he might let something slip. A phrase, a direction of research, a confidence in his voice that physics insiders would recognize as the confidence of a man who knows something works. Groves and the OSS made the decision. Send someone to listen. And if what they heard was wrong, if Heisenberg stood at that chalkboard in Zurich and said the things that would mean Germany had the bomb within months, then Heisenberg would not leave that lecture hall alive. The question was who to send. The answer was the baseball player. The logic of choosing Berg for the Zurich mission was impeccable once you understood it, and baffling until you did. He was not a physicist. He could follow a physics lecture well enough to understand its general direction, but he was not going to catch a subtle theoretical error or recognize a breakthrough in quantum field theory from a casual description. He was, however, the right man for three reasons that had nothing to do with physics. First, he spoke German, native-level German, not textbook German, not tourist German, the German of someone who had read German literature and studied German phonetics and spent time in German-speaking countries until the language lived in him the way his other languages did. He could sit in that lecture hall and hear not just the words, but the tone, the hesitation, the confidence, the specific register of a man who is concealing something versus a man who is expressing something freely. Second, he could pass. Berg was 6 feet 1 inch and built like an athlete and carried himself with the effortless social authority of a man who had spent 15 years being the most interesting person in every room he entered. He could walk into a physics seminar at ETH Zurich as a visiting academic, and nobody was going to look twice. He was not nervous in crowds. He was not nervous around famous men. He had played in front of tens of thousands of people in Yankee Stadium. A university lecture hall in Switzerland was not going to break him. Third, and most important, he could make the call. This was what Groves and the OSS needed most, and what was hardest to find. They could not put a radio in Berg's hand. They could not have him step outside the lecture hall to consult with Washington. The decision, shoot or don't shoot, had to be made in real time, in that room, by a single person who could assess the information as it was delivered and act on his assessment before the opportunity disappeared. Berg had spent 15 seasons behind home plate, reading pitchers and batters in situations, and making split-second calls with the game on the line. He had negotiated with physicists in Italy. He had charmed intelligence out of men who didn't realize they were giving it. He had parachuted into Yugoslavia and assessed the relative strength of partisan factions, and reported back with analysis that shaped Allied policy. He could make the call. On December 18, 1944, Berg was ordered to attend the conference and to make contact with Heisenberg. If there were any indications that the Germans were working on the bomb, he was ordered to shoot Heisenberg inside the lecture hall if necessary. On December 18, Berg attended the lecture and quietly sat with a pistol inside his pocket before a small audience of professors and graduate students. He had also been given a cyanide tablet. He sat in the front row. He opened his notebook. He listened. Werner Heisenberg walked to the chalkboard at ETH Zurich on December 18, 1944, and began to speak about S-matrix theory. S-matrix, scattering matrix, a mathematical framework for describing how elementary particles interact during collisions, how they come together, exchange energy, and separate. Elegant, abstract, entirely theoretical, the kind of physics that lives at the level of pure mathematics and has no immediate application to anything that might be loaded into an aircraft and dropped on a city. Berg listened. The room was small, perhaps 40 people. Graduate students in the front rows with their notebooks open, professors along the sides. The particular atmosphere of academic physics, slightly musty, slightly competitive, the collective intelligence of the room oriented toward the man at the chalkboard with the focused attention of people who have chosen to spend their lives understanding things most humans cannot. Berg was 4 feet from Heisenberg. The pistol was in his coat. He watched Heisenberg's hands on the chalk. He watched his face. He had been trained, in the months of OSS work preceding this mission, to read physicists, to know what the language of a man working on weapons research looked like versus the language of a man working on pure theory. The specific vocabulary, the specific confidence, the specific way a man holds himself when he knows something works. Heisenberg spoke for 90 minutes. He spoke about scattering matrices. He spoke about quantum theory. He spoke in the specific, careful language of a theoretical physicist at the top of his field about things that had no bomb in them. Berg wrote in his notebook. He listened, he analyzed, and somewhere in those 90 minutes, the former baseball catcher from Newark made his assessment. Heisenberg was not working on a bomb. Or more precisely, Heisenberg was not close to a bomb. The lecture contained no hint of breakthrough, no suggestion of weapons-grade uranium, no confidence of a man who has solved the central problem of nuclear fission and is working through the engineering to weaponize it. The lecture was the lecture of a great physicist in wartime doing what great physicists do when their country is losing, retreating into pure theory, working on problems that would matter after the war, keeping his mind alive in the only way available to him. Heisenberg, during the lecture, let slip his belief that Germany would lose the war and that the Nazis were not close to developing the bomb. Berg kept his hand away from his pocket. The lecture ended. The audience applauded. Berg closed his notebook. He did not shoot Werner Heisenberg. The lecture was not the end of it. A scientist named Flute, the OSS codename for Paul Scherrer, the director of physics at the Federal Institute of Technology, had secured an invitation for Berg to dine with Werner Heisenberg after the lecture. After the dinner party, Berg joined Heisenberg on a stroll back to his hotel. What the German scientist didn't know was that Berg had instructions to assassinate Heisenberg if he believed the Nazis were close to acquiring a nuclear weapon. Think about what this means. Berg sat across a dinner table from Heisenberg. He ate with him. He spoke German with him. He asked questions in the careful, indirect way of a man who knows how to extract information from a conversation without appearing to extract it. He watched Heisenberg's face across the wine and the bread and the particular awkwardness of wartime dinner conversation between men from different sides of a conflict that had not yet ended. Heisenberg was tired. Not the tiredness of a man who has been working on a secret weapon and is close to finishing it. The tiredness of a man who has spent 5 years watching his country disintegrate around him, who has watched his colleagues flee, Einstein, Fermi, Szilard, Teller, all the great Jewish physicists who had left Germany in the 1930s when they read what was coming, who has spent 5 years being associated, against his will, with a regime whose scientific priorities made no sense, and whose racial laws had gutted the very community of researchers he needed to accomplish anything. Heisenberg across the dinner table was not a man hiding a weapon. He was a man surviving a catastrophe. Berg read this the way he had been trained to read it, the way he had read pictures for 15 years, not from the explicit signal, but from the 1,000 small things that accumulate into certainty before you can name any of them individually. Berg sensed when a runner was going to steal, and even though Heisenberg was trying to hide it, Berg knew he was despondent because Germany didn't have the bomb and was going to lose the war. After dinner, they walked. Berg walked with Heisenberg back toward his hotel through the December streets of Zurich. 2 men talking about physics in German, one of them with a pistol. The pistol stayed in the pocket. Berg said goodnight to Heisenberg at the hotel door. He turned and walked away. He wrote his report that night. The assessment was clear and unambiguous. Germany was not close to a bomb. Heisenberg was not a threat in the immediate term. The assassination was not necessary. He sent the report to OSS headquarters. He kept the gun. He kept the cyanide. He went to bed in neutral Switzerland while the war raged 6 hours away by train. Here is where the story becomes something more than a spy thriller. Berg's assessment was correct. Germany did not have the bomb. The Alsos mission, advancing with Allied forces through Germany in early 1945, found the evidence. The German nuclear program was years behind the Manhattan Project. The facilities were inadequate. The resources had never been committed at the scale required. The scientific leadership was fractured. The Nazi bureaucracy had made decisions that, from a weapons development standpoint, were catastrophic. Germany was not going to have an atomic bomb. But Berg did not know this in December 1944. Nobody outside the program knew this. What Berg had was a 90-minute lecture and a dinner conversation and his own judgment. His judgment was correct. And the weight of what that judgment carried is almost impossible to hold in the mind without it slipping away. If Berg had assessed differently, if Heisenberg had said something in that lecture that sounded like breakthrough, if the dinner conversation had produced a phrase or a confidence that Berg's trained ear read as warning, Heisenberg would have died in Zurich on December 18, 1944. And the consequences of that death in 1944, at that specific moment in the war, would have been complex and unpredictable in ways that make the imagination stall. Heisenberg's death would have told Germany that there was a spy in Zurich. It would have told them that the Allies knew about the nuclear program and were targeting its scientists. This might have accelerated German efforts. It might have prompted security measures that concealed the program's actual state more completely. It might have produced international incidents in neutral Switzerland. More significantly, killing Heisenberg would not have ended German nuclear research. It would have removed its most visible figure. The program would have continued under other physicists. The Allies would have been no closer to knowing its actual status, and considerably more certain that Germany was working on something worth killing the lead scientist to prevent. Berg's decision to not shoot produced clean intelligence. The intelligence told the Manhattan Project that it did not have a race, that the urgency was real, but the competition was not what everyone feared. The decision to shoot would have produced noise, uncertainty, and the permanent question of whether removing Heisenberg had accelerated or delayed something that was already not happening. The gun in the pocket, untouched, was more valuable than the gun fired. This is the paradox at the center of Berg's story. The action that mattered most was the action he did not take. The shot that shaped history was the one he chose not to fire. Berg's decision in Zurich was not just about Heisenberg. It was about what happened next. The Manhattan Project reached its operational stage in July 1945. The Trinity test, the first detonation of a nuclear device, occurred on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert. The bomb worked. On August 6, 1945, a uranium bomb called Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. The explosion killed between 70,000 and 80,000 people instantly. Tens of thousands more died in the following weeks and months from radiation exposure and burns. On August 9th, a plutonium bomb called Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. The death toll was between 40,000 and 80,000 immediate deaths. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The war ended. Now consider the alternative that Groves in the OSS had been trying to prevent. If Germany had possessed the bomb, if Heisenberg had solved the problem, if Berg's assessment had been wrong, if the gun had stayed in the pocket when it should have come out, the calculus of the entire war shifts. A German atomic bomb in 1944 or early 1945 would have been used. Not in Japan, in London, in the Allied supply ports of Cherbourg and Antwerp, in Moscow, in the concentration of American forces preparing for operations. The war would not have ended in May 1945. The war might not have ended at all, or might have ended in terms that made the actual post-war world unrecognizable. Berg was not thinking about all of this in the lecture hall. He was thinking about 90 minutes of S-matrix theory and what a tired physicist's eyes look like across a dinner table. He was thinking about the difference between the sound of a man hiding something and the sound of a man who has nothing to hide. He made his call. He got it right. The weight of getting it right, the number of lives preserved by the decision to leave the pistol in his coat, is not calculable. It is the weight of a counterfactual, the war that didn't happen, the cities that weren't bombed, the men who came home because the enemy didn't have the weapon that would have kept them there. You cannot count the lives saved by a gun that was never fired. But they are real. Berg returned to the United States on April 25, 1945. Germany surrendered on May 7th. The war was over. Berg resigned from the Strategic Services Unit in August 1945. On October 10, 1945, President Truman awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor the United States government can bestow. Berg was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom on October 10, 1945, but he rejected the award. Some years after his death, the award was accepted on his behalf by his sister. He rejected it. He never fully explained why. The decision was consistent with everything else about him. A man who had spent his life declining the categories others tried to place him in. The baseball player who went to Princeton, the Princeton man who played baseball, the lawyer who never practiced law, the spy who never wrote his memoir. What followed was 27 years of drift. Berg had no real job after the war. The CIA tried to use him in 1952, sent him to Europe to gather intelligence on Soviet atomic science. The CIA received nothing in return. For the next 20 years, Berg had no real job, living off friends and relatives who put up with him because of his great charm. He lived much of his latter life with his brother Samuel and then his sister Ethel in Belleville, New Jersey. He read 10 newspapers a day. He wandered. He showed up unannounced at friends' houses and stayed for weeks and then disappeared. He talked about everything except the things that mattered most: the OSS mission, the lecture hall in Zurich, the pistol he didn't fire. His biographer Nicholas Dawidoff, who wrote the definitive account of Berg's life, The Catcher Was a Spy, published in 1994, interviewed dozens of people who had known Berg. None of them fully knew him. He was a man of absolute compartmentalization, a person who had lived so long in the habit of not revealing himself that the habit had become indistinguishable from his character. He had secrets that nobody ever extracted from him. He kept them until the end. Berg died on May 29, 1972, at age 70, from injuries sustained in a fall at home. A nurse at the Newark, New Jersey hospital where he died recalled his final words as, "How did the Mets do today?" He had spent his last conscious moment asking about baseball. Everything else went with him. There is a second story inside the Berg story, and it belongs to Werner Heisenberg. After the war, Heisenberg spent years arguing, in interviews, in his memoir, in conversations with other physicists, that he had deliberately slowed the German nuclear program, that he had understood early that a bomb was possible, but had chosen, at some level of conscious decision, not to pursue it with the urgency that would have produced results. That his role in German nuclear research was more custodial than productive, keeping the program alive enough to protect physicists from the front lines, while ensuring it never produced the weapon. This claim was disputed immediately and remains disputed. His critics, including several fellow physicists who were interned at Farm Hall in England after the war, and whose conversations were secretly recorded, argued that Heisenberg simply didn't know how much enriched uranium was needed for a critical mass, that his estimate was off by a factor that made the program seem more difficult than it was, that he hadn't deliberately stalled, he had been genuinely wrong about the physics. The Farm Hall transcripts, declassified in 1992, captured Heisenberg's reaction when he learned about Hiroshima. He was shocked. Not morally shocked, scientifically shocked. The amount of enriched uranium that the Americans had managed to produce, the specific design of the weapon, these were things he had not expected. Things that suggested, to several historians who studied the transcripts, that Heisenberg had not fully solved the engineering problems and had not known he hadn't solved them. The truth is, probably not either story in its pure form. What the transcripts in the documents in the archival research accumulated over 8 decades suggest is something more complicated. Heisenberg was a great physicist who worked on a nuclear program under a regime he despised, in a context where the resources and the scientific community necessary for success had been decimated by Nazi racial policy. He neither heroically sabotaged the program nor urgently pursued it to completion. He existed in the middle, doing what scientists do when the conditions for great work are absent, which is to do smaller work and wait. Berg read this correctly from 90 minutes of S-matrix theory. The baseball player read the physicist better than the physicist read himself. There is a line in the uncertainty principle, Heisenberg's own contribution to physics, that describes something beyond physics. The act of observing changes the thing observed. You cannot measure a particle's position without disturbing its momentum. The observer is never neutral. The measurement is never passive. The act of looking is always, at some level, an intervention. Berg sat 4 feet from Werner Heisenberg and did not intervene. He observed. He measured. He left the momentum undisturbed. And the measurement he took, the assessment delivered in a report sent from a hotel room in Zurich on the night of December 18, 1944, shaped every decision the Manhattan Project made in the months that followed. The acceleration or deceleration of timelines, the allocation of resources, the confidence or panic with which Groves and his scientists went to work each morning knowing what they knew about Germany's progress. One man in a lecture hall with a gun he didn't fire. This is what the intelligence world calls negative intelligence, the finding that something is not happening. It is, paradoxically, the hardest intelligence to produce and the most valuable when it is accurate. The absence of the threat is invisible. You cannot point to it. You cannot celebrate it. The cities that were not bombed leave no monuments. The lives saved by the assessment of a man in a front row seat leave no record of themselves. Only the war that actually happened is documented. The war that Berg's assessment helped prevent exists only as a possibility, vivid, terrible, and permanently unknowable in its specifics. What is knowable is this. Berg went in with a gun and a cyanide capsule and the instruction to kill if necessary. He came out with both untouched and a report that told the people who needed to know that the worst was not happening. He never took credit for it. He never explained it. He spent 27 years reading newspapers and watching baseball and declining to be categorized. He asked about the Mets. He died. The award he turned down was eventually accepted by his sister. The decision he made in that lecture hall, alone, in real time, with the pistol in his coat and the physicist at the chalkboard, and the entire weight of the nuclear age in the balance, was never given a name. It was just the thing he did. The call he made. The runner he read before the runner ran. He had been making that kind of call his whole life. This one just happened to matter more than the others. The conventional shape of this story wants Berg to be a hero who made a brave decision under pressure. That framing is true as far as it goes, but it misses something. Berg's decision was not primarily an act of courage. It was an act of judgment. And the judgment was possible because of something that no military regulation, no intelligence protocol, no chain of command could have provided in that room on that afternoon. He knew what he was listening for. He had spent his entire life in baseball, in languages, in law, in the particular social intelligence of a man who moved through worlds that should not have accepted him, developing an ability to read situations with precision. To know what a person was telling you when they thought they were telling you nothing. To hear the confidence or the absence of confidence in a man's voice and know the difference. The OSS gave him a gun and an order. His life gave him the capacity to know when to use it and when not to. This is the thing that institutions struggle with and never fully solve. You can train an agent. You can give him a cover identity, a weapon, a mission brief, a cyanide capsule for worst-case scenarios. You can prepare him for the procedures, the protocols, the contingencies. You cannot give him judgment. Judgment comes from somewhere else. It comes from the accumulation of everything a person has done and read and listened to and gotten wrong and corrected. It comes from the Princeton language classroom and the baseball diamond and the dinner tables in Rome and Yugoslavia and Switzerland. It comes from 15 years of reading pictures and the specific, unglamorous intelligence of a career backup catcher who watched everything from behind home plate while everyone else watched the pitcher. Berg's judgment saved Werner Heisenberg's life. It may have saved a great many other lives that neither man ever knew about. The lesson is not comfortable for institutions to absorb. It says that the most critical decisions cannot be made by committee or by protocol. That sometimes the moment requires a single person with a specific accumulation of irreplaceable experience, operating alone with no ability to consult upward, making a call in real time, and then trusting the call. Groves trusted Berg's call. He had to. There was no other option. The man in the front row was the only one who had been in the front row. The man in the front row got it right. He always said very little about it afterward. He had, after all, done nothing visible. He had sat in a chair. He had listened to a lecture. He had eaten dinner. He had walked a man back to his hotel. He had not fired a gun. How do you tell that story without sounding like you're describing a failure? You don't. You let the story tell itself. You let the absence of the shot speak. In the silence where the gun was never fired, in the lecture hall that Werner Heisenberg walked out of alive on December 18, 1944, in the hotel room where Mo Berg wrote his report and sealed it and sent it to people who could act on it, in all of that silence, the most important decision of the Second World War was made by a baseball player who spoke 12 languages and couldn't hit in any of them.